Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist David Maraniss said, and I quote, "I believe that life is chaotic, a jumble of accidents, ambitions, misconceptions, bold intentions, lazy happenstances, and unintended consequences. Yet I also believe that there are connections that will illuminate our world, revealing its endless mystery and wonder." Welcome to the Aerial View, the podcast drawn from this transformative book by Dr. Mark Klein. And today we're going to dig deeper into the subject that David Maraniss was talking about, connections. In fact, Mark, you've got an entire chapter in your book on this very topic. So let's talk about connections and why they're so important.
First of all, I love that quote. That's a great quote. I wish I had written it. Maybe I would have won a Pulitzer Prize if I'd written that. Oh, well.
Maybe you would have, yeah.
Another day.
Yeah.
Yeah, connections, they're fascinating. And, just to jumpstart this happens to everybody. So you're sitting around thinking about somebody, and either a minute later or 10 minutes later or that afternoon, somebody you hadn't thought about in a year sends you an email or calls you. That happens to everybody. I have one of my favorite experiences of this, I think I write about this in the book, was I was talking to my publicist for my last book, not this book, the book I wrote before this called Franklin Rock, which is a novel. And she was asking me if I knew any of the owners of the bookstores in the Washington metropolitan area where we live. And I say, well, I have a guy I know. He's a doctor who I know. And he has told me that he's friendly with one of the principals in one of the best known bookstores in Washington. So we're on a Zoom call, she and I. Just at that exact moment, my cell phone is sitting next to me, and up pops this guy's name. Now, here's what's so incredible. Okay, that's pretty cool that I talk about it, and boom, the phone rings. But here's the amazing part. He has never called me on my cell phone before that. He's a doctor. We talked about patients together, and we would talk from our offices. He'd call me about a patient, or I'd give him a result of something I've done on a patient. So I don't remember ever having a cell phone, having a conversation on a cell phone with him, ever. I had his number in my phone in case I needed him, but he never called me on my cell phone before, right? So we're on the Zoom call. So I'm like stunned. So I tell my publicist, hang on a second. So I answer the phone and I say, hey, how you doing? He said, great. How are you? I said, I'm fine. I go, what's up? He goes, I was just sitting around doing nothing and you just popped into my mind and I thought I'd check out and see how you're doing. Right. So people who are listening can't see our eyes, but my eyes got big as saucers, right? So I hang up on him, I'll call him back later. So that's one of these mysterious connections that David Maraniss is talking about and we all experience. What the heck are they? So in my last book called Franklin Rock, the protagonist is Franklin Rock, and he's a very interesting guy who learns that his mission is to save the world. He can time travel. It's very, very cool. And in the book, I describe something called a Franklin Rock moment. And here's a definition of a Franklin Rock moment. A Franklin Rock moment is when a hint of the mystery of the universe is suddenly and unexpectedly revealed. I'll repeat that. When a hint of the mystery of the universe is suddenly and unexpectedly revealed. Meaning, when these crazy things happen like that, it's as if a little window is opened up to give you a peek into what we can't see. I think I've told you about this analogy I like to use. If you're in a room, you walk into a room and there's not a stick of furniture, there's nothing on the walls, no curtains, nothing. The room is completely bare, no carpet, etc. Just light shining in through a window. And your reaction would be, oh, this room is empty, completely empty. But of course, the room is not completely empty. It's full of the wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum that you can't see. Ultraviolet, infrared, X-rays, gamma rays. We can't see any of those things. We can see what's called visible light. It's a very narrow slice of what we call the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio waves, TV waves, all these things, right? We can't see all of them. But if we could see them, if we could turn on a little machine that had these little particles that stuck to these waves and they became visible, we'd be claustrophobic. The room is full of this stuff, neutrinos, all kinds of particles. I mean, there's tons of stuff that we can't see everywhere. Dark energy, dark matter, all this stuff is everywhere. So, but we can't see these. We can't appreciate them. And these Franklin Rock moments, these connections we're talking about, are the same way. We can't see them, and so we dismiss them as coincidence. But there's a lot in physics that tells us, maybe not. Maybe there's something else going on. There's a concept in quantum physics called entanglement. And it's actually gotten a lot of play in the lay press. I'm not a physicist, but I've read a lot about it. And entanglement refers to the fact that like two particles, teeny microscopic, subatomic particles, are born at the same time from some reaction, and they're identical, and they go flying off in opposite directions. And they can be trillions of miles apart. But if you try to test something on the one particle, let's say in your laboratory, whatever you find will be exactly the same on that particle that's 3 trillion miles away. They're entangled. So here's an analogy I think is easy to understand. Let's say that you and I decide to play Simon Says, and you're in Australia because you could use a nice vacation.
Thank
and
you.
I'm here. Notice I sent you to Australia and I stayed here in the cold because I know you don't like the cold.
Yeah, but I also don't like the plane ride to Australia.
Oh,
but go ahead.
shucks. All right. Well, I can't help that one.
It's kind of long.
Anyway, so you're in Australia, I'm here, and each of us has a friend who's going to play Simon Says, and they're going to give us the instructions. So, and we're not connected by phone. We're not on the internet. We don't have any email. You and I have no communication at all. Zero. And so the person who's giving me the instructions says, Simon Says, stand on your right foot. And I do. And instantaneously, without any communication whatsoever, at the exact same instant, you stand on your right foot. And then the person here says, Mark, Simon Says, raise your left hand. And I raise my left hand, and you again, with no communication, no email, no phone, no text, nothing, you instantaneously raise your left hand. We'd say, well, how is that possible? Well, we would say you and I are entangled. Somehow we're connected. We shouldn't be able to do that because that flies against Einstein's rules about nothing going faster than the speed of light, because that would be faster than the speed of light. But these things, we know these things happen. Physicists have proved that entanglement is real. Two things can be entangled and be incredible distance apart with no known connections, and yet they react the exact same way. So what does that tell us? Why is that important? It just tells you that there's a lot under the surface that we can't see. It's the equivalent of being in the bare room that's full of the wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum. We can't appreciate them, but these things exist. They're real. They occur. Physics has proven it. So even something like getting that phone call from this guy, I can't explain it, but everybody has this happen to them all the time. And there's some mysterious connections that we can't explain. So why is this interesting? Well, it's fascinating for sure. But what does this tell us? That's really the question. What can we learn from this?
So you believe there's no such thing as a coincidence? Is there such a thing as a coincidence?
That's a really great question. I'll tell you why. As we know that every choice, every decision somebody makes is like that butterfly in Asia that flaps its wings and creates a hurricane across the earth, right? We've talked about how every decision is like a bubble that we release, goes into the world, and then starts bouncing around everybody else's bubbles, everybody else's choices and decisions. And that's how reality is created. And it's completely impossible to predict what's going to happen. So are there coincidences? Coincidences are the result, what we call coincidences, are the result of people making choices all over the place, right? So the result is a coincidence, but is it really a coincidence? Meaning that all these choices and decisions that were made along the way to create this coincidence were intentional. Something happened. Somebody made a decision. Somebody made a choice. So you could easily make the case that what we call a coincidence is really not a coincidence. It's the result of all these actions, choices, and activities that have been made by the billions of people on the planet.
But I have to
Does that make sense?
Yes. So that means I have to make that choice at the exact moment that you're making your choice. Correct?
Yeah, but if you didn't, a different coincidence would occur.
Right. But also at the same time, millions of people are probably making that same choice.
Or a choice. It doesn't matter what the choice is.
Well, that's right. But if in fact it's going to be me standing on my right foot and you standing on your right foot at the same time, that's the choice that I made at that particular moment. And it's the same choice that you made at that particular moment.
No, let's not confuse those things. That's called entanglement. I was just trying to show you that there can be connections between things and events that don't seem to make sense because they run afoul of Einstein's rule of that you can't go faster than the speed of light. But the point of entanglement is there's this mysterious network of something underlying the function, the structure of the universe that allows these things to happen. This entanglement. We don't understand it yet. We know it's real. It's been proven, but scientists still don't understand exactly what it is. What I'm talking about with coincidence is that people made choices near us, far from us, and as a result, we bang into each other at the supermarket. We happen to be at the supermarket at the same time because a bunch of different things had to happen for us to show up there. We can say, oh, what a coincidence. But in fact, that coincidence is a result of choices made by you, me, and lots of other people, right? For instance, you were at a stoplight and it turned red and you had to wait 2 more minutes. And if you had not, I would have left the store before you got to the supermarket. But that red light kept you for 2 more minutes and I happened to still be in the store. That's the coincidence. So all these things that are going on in the world, when we call them coincidence, they are the result of choices and decisions made by us and other people. And if that didn't happen, maybe you would have run into somebody else in the supermarket, and that would have been because they didn't have to wait at a traffic light, or somebody didn't cross in front of them that they had to wait for in a crosswalk, and they got there while you were there. So different decisions lead to different coincidences, but we call them coincidences, but it's only because of the result of the intersection of an infinite number of choices made by lots and lots of people and events on the planet. It's very cool when you think about it.
It is. It's fascinating. I mean, Moranis talks about unintended consequences and lazy happenstances, which is really kind of an interesting take on a lot of things. I guess, this whole notion of connections, and when I think about a connection, we're going to make a connection. We physically think about it. Mentally, we are making a connection. In your book, you talk a lot about probabilistic. If things are probabilistic. Tell me a little bit about that. What do you mean by that?
There is no such thing as an event that is 100% certain. So the way the world seems to work, according to quantum physics, is that you can never know with certainty or predict an outcome. You can only predict the probability. And there's all these mathematical formulas and the Schrodinger equation, and it's really wacky stuff that most people never. Schrodinger equation. Have you heard of the Schrodinger cat?
No.
Okay, well, you don't have to go into that, but it's quantum physics. But anyway, quantum physics is very mathematical, and you have to have super high level of math, which I don't have. One of my kids does, but I don't. But it's been proven that, or it seems to be that the way the world works is it's all probable. So the identity, one of the examples is knowing where an electron, this tiny little thing that goes around a nucleus, where it is does it have a real position or not? So we're not going to go into quantum physics, but the point is, you can't predict these things with 100% accuracy, no matter how fine and excellent your tools are, your equipment is, doesn't matter. The way the universe seems to operate is we can only know the probability of something happens. So when people say anything is possible, that's quite true, actually. It is quite true. So, which is, to me, some people find that unnerving and destabilizing. But I think it's very cool. It does give you such an optimism about that anything can happen in the world. Now, some bad things are going to happen for sure.
Right.
But I'm a naturally optimistic guy. And I look at that thing and I go, wow, that is so cool that the world is probabilistic, that anything really, really could happen, that it is impossible to gather enough information, no matter how much information you have, no matter how fancy your computers are, your data collection, you can never predict the outcome of anything with 100% certainty. It's not that you don't have enough information. It's just not possible. That's the way the world seems to work. It's very cool. So, I look at these things and I try and take those kind of scientific facts and place them in something that makes sense in our lives. And that's when we get to these connections that, for instance, the guy who called me when I was on that Zoom call, yes, he had to make an intentional decision to call me at that moment, even though he'd never called my cell phone before. And how would he have known that I was talking about him at that moment with my publicist, at that exact moment, precise moment? Okay, so we'd say, what a coincidence. But it can't just be a coincidence, right? Because they happen all the time. And as we just said, coincidences are the result of intentional choices and decisions made by people. But there's something else. What entered his head at that moment to make him think of me when I was on the call with this? So when you look at the street view, you go, oh, that's impossible. No way that could happen. But when you get to the aerial view is where these weird connections live. It's where all these things that we can't explain call home. right? So there, everything's possible. So imagine you're watching a stage and you're watching a play and you're seeing these people move in ways that you can't even imagine. Let's say they're robots or puppets, right? And you're looking at how are they doing this? And of course, underneath the stage, there's this incredible apparatus of electronics and all kinds of crazy things that are making these things move. I mean, you can't see them. You don't know they're there. So you're trying hard to explain what you see. Here's another one of my favorite ones. So we've had Bluetooth for like, I don't know, 40 years. I don't know how many years. But let's go back when you and I were kids. If somebody gave you a set of headphones, because we had headphones, we plugged them into a receiver or something. We had headphones in those days. We're not that old. But if somebody gave you a set of headphones, say, put these on and you're going to listen to music. And all of a sudden you were listening to something on some record you didn't even own. And you'd say, well, what's going on? You take the headphones off. You'd say, well, they're too small to have a record in here or a tape in here. How is this working? And somebody would say,
it's not plugged into anything. It's just
not plugged into anything.
Okay.
It's just on your head, right?
Uh-huh.
And you go, that's impossible. Because nobody knew that something called Bluetooth was going to be invented 30-something years later, right? So you try and explain to somebody how that works. You can't because the technology is unknown. And yet it's real. Bluetooth, this ability to do things wirelessly, theoretically has been around in physics forever. But we finally figured out how to do it. But to that person 50 years ago, they'd say it's impossible. And they try everything they know to figure out how it's done. And they would never come up with the answer.
Many years ago, I remember my mother used to talk about mental telepathy. I would say something and she would say, I was going to say that we must have mental telepathy. Tell me, is there such a thing as mental telepathy? Or was my mother making that up?
I don't think she was making it up. I don't know what you call it. I don't know how it works, but these are these connections. Again,
that's right.
There's this underlying structure to the universe. So the reason I brought up entanglement early, this physical property, that things can be connected that are zillions of miles apart, is because it tells us there's some type of underlying structure to the universe that physicists don't still understand. There are things called dark matter and dark energy there's more dark matter than there is regular matter in the world. There's more dark energy than regular energy, and yet nobody knows what it is. So there's this underlying structure to the universe that we still don't understand. And that's where these connections and your mother's mental telepathy, where all these things occur. We don't understand them, but it's why I discussed the Bluetooth headphones. Just because you can't explain it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We just don't have the answers yet. So Bluetooth headphones, if somebody, like we talked about, if somebody gave you headphones with no wires and you heard music, you'd be stunned. You could not explain it, nor could anybody at that time. Now, let's say we fast forward 100 years. Perhaps all these connections and things we're talking about now will be well explained. Maybe dark matter, dark energy, how entanglement works, the underlying structure of the universe. Maybe this will all be revealed and it won't be a big deal. And whoever's creating what would be the equivalent of a podcast 100 years from now, because it for sure won't be a podcast,
yeah.
It'll be something else, we'll have the answers. But we don't have them right now. But that doesn't mean they aren't important. Here's why they're important. So we haven't really gotten to that. Why do we care about these things? Why, besides that they're cool and these Franklin Rock moments when a hint of the mystery of the universe is suddenly and unexpectedly revealed are cool, right? What message do they tell us? What can we learn from that? Is there anything to derive from them? And if there is, it again explains the fact that when you're in the aerial view, you get a perspective that you cannot get when you're stuck on the street view. Everything that occurs on the street view has to happen by some direct interaction. You have to call me, you have to text me, you have to touch me, you have to push me. We have to somehow directly interact. In the aerial view, where these weird connections occur, where this entanglement occurs, we don't have to worry about those. We don't even have to think about whether they're real or not. We just can accept them, and gives us that perspective that the world is so much more than we thought, and that the aerial view, this perspective of all of time and removing ourselves from the street view, allows us to accept all these things and focuses us again on things that are important, not to minimize that the street view isn't. I don't mean the street view is not important. We have to eat, we have to make a living, we have to have housing, all these things. We have to have relationships. These are all street view things. Very, very, very important. That's why we're alive. But the perspective of the aerial view allows us to take these in context and to understand there are things we don't understand. There's more to the world than is apparent, certainly to us. There's more to our interactions that's apparent. And that the world is a stage on which we are required to act out our own individual missions. It's why history is repeated again and again. It's why the events of a life are repeated again and again and again. Yes, our parents didn't have Bluetooth headphones, but the relationships they had, the lives they lived were exactly the same as ours. They went through the same up and downs emotionally, physically. Life gets repeated again and again. That's, again, peculiar that we repeat everything again and again, both as individuals, as society. But it's important because that's why we're here.
But do we ever learn from that? But do we ever, in other words, do we ever learn? So if everything's repeated over and over, that means wars are repeated over and over and famine is repeated over and over. When do we learn and when do we, or is it for another generation? They have to learn. How do we do that? How do we stop the madness, if you will? I mean, how do we stop the bad and only because we've learned from it and go on and create a more perfect society? How do we do that?
Well, you've noticed it hasn't worked.
No, it hasn't.
Okay, that's the point. I don't think it's ever going to work. Now, I say this from the vantage point of a person who's trying to fix it, right?
Right.
That's my goal. And of course, the Don Quixote in me swinging at those windmills, I recognize that it's unlikely I'll succeed, but I sort of have to try, right? That's what this whole thing is about. This is why we're here. But the fact that everything gets repeated is the biggest clue. It tells you that that each individual life has a purpose. We can't just open up a manual and say, oh, this is what happened 200, 500, 1,000 years ago. This is what happened to my grandparents and great-grandparents. And so I don't have to do that. No, you're required to do it. Life is experiential. You cannot just read about it. You have to feel it. You have to experience it. Why? Why can't we do what you just said? Why can't we learn? Because we're here for a mission. We're here to prepare. We're here to evolve. If not, we could read that manual when we were 5 or 8 years old. We could do it. Societies could do it. Everybody could do it. Go, oh, we're not falling for that again. We're not going to war over this. But yet we do. There's multiple wars raging in the world. The big ones obviously are Ukraine and Gaza, but Sudan is a mess. We don't even talk about what's going on in Sudan, and that's probably the worst of all the things that maybe, well, it's hard to compare tragedies, but it's horrific, right? Nobody seems to be up in arms about it. I guess it's not politically popular, but for whatever reason, and there are smaller wars brewing all over the place. Why? We see what war does. We understand the ramifications. We know the outcomes. Why do we keep doing this? Why do we keep doing this? Because we have a mission, an individual mission that we're required to fulfill. And part of that, we're going to run into people who are going to make the same mistakes and do the same things as the billions who came before them. Now, our job is to try and educate them and change it and evolve it. In all candor, it's a tall order because it hasn't happened yet, right? Each of us must experience our lives individually, and society's the same way.
So as the optimist that you are, that's rather a pessimistic view.
Yeah, that wasn't it?
And you depressed me, and I'm. Yeah.
No, I'll tell you why. You why. Because just because something hasn't happened before doesn't mean it can't happen. You love sports.
I do.
This is the first time a quarterback ever threw 5 touchdowns, ran for 600 yards, and tackled 3 people in the history of the game. Right? We hear that stuff all the time. First basketball player to have, 25 rebounds, 50 points, and,
right.
25 assists, right? We see that all the time. It's never happened, but it could. And so that's why I'm spending my time and you're spending your time doing, for instance, this podcast and the work we're doing individually, is because even though it hasn't happened, it doesn't mean it can't. And our job, at least I feel this way, is to try as hard as you can. And maybe this will be the time it works.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because you mentioned sport. I do. I love sports. And I love sports for lots of different reasons, not the least of which is that there's a winner and a loser. And not everybody wins the prize because there's... And I look, and I'm a great baseball fanatic. I love baseball and I'm passionate about baseball. And maybe the reason I watch it is because I don't know the outcome, but I do know the outcome because it's happened before and it's going to happen again. But I want to see it again. And so, maybe it's probabilistic in that I know that when, Mike Trout is going to get up to the plate, he's probably going to hit a home run because he's done it before. He might not do it again, but chances are that connection's already been made. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm optimistic about sports because there's a beginning and a middle and an end. But it really isn't, is there? It goes on and on and on, doesn't it?
It's like I think about this a lot. The Eagles just won the Super Bowl.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And guess what? Next year, there'll be another winner of the Super Bowl. Maybe it'll be the Eagles, but eventually it won't be.
Right.
And so you win, you're the champion, it's great, but guess what? It's temporary.
That's the
There's
point.
going to be another one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right? So when people get so upset that their team lost, they're so excited that their team won. And I get it, because I'm a Washington Capitals fan. When they finally won the Stanley Cup, I was euphoric for like weeks. I would stop people on the street and I'd say, hey, the Caps won the cup, right? It was just fun, right?
Sure.
It was a fun thing. But I recognize that next year there'll be another winner and there'll be another winner. And so you have to, that's where the aerial view is so helpful. You keep these in perspective, right? So yeah, again, so the Chiefs lost the game and their fans were crushed and the Eagles fans were thrilled. And that's the way the world works, right? There's ups, there's downs. It's a sine wave. It's going to occur again and again. So the message cannot be the winning. The message has to be the process, that these great athletes work so hard and they accomplished something and they felt great that they accomplished something. Because remember, accomplishments are a cornerstone of happiness. And they're well aware of the fact that it's not going to last forever, but they've done it. From the aerial view, you get that perspective that it's okay that it's not forever, that we're not going to live forever, that our time on earth is limited. It's not about longevity. It's not about being the champion forever. It's about making the evolution, whether you're a team from the day that like baseball, spring training starts in February, pitchers and catchers, and they work really hard at the end of October. There's a champion, and what a great sense of accomplishment for that team. And also other teams who have done well, but it's that process. Next year, there'll be somebody else. The point is that from the aerial view, we understand that our mission is to make this evolution. It's a very personal thing. You need to do the best you can. You need to become a person of substance, create those accomplishments, build that self-esteem so that you can make that successful evolution from selfish to selfless, from inward to outward focus. That's why you shouldn't be fretting over who wins or an election or things like that. You can't control them. That's not the story of life.
That's true. That's good. And that's a good way to end this. And I thank you for that. And so let me end today's podcast, as I usually do, with your own words from your book. You were talking about how your colleague called you out of the clear blue, and you'd been on the phone and you talking about him. You said, and I quote, "My colleague's call was the result of the instantaneous creation of a connection between us. Just how and why remain mysteries. But that is how it is with these inexplicable but extremely common events. We can't understand them, but we sense that there is something special about them." I must say my time with you today has been special. I'll see you next time. You have any final parting words, Doc?
Just to remember, if you have a question, you can send it to question@wisdomfromtheaerialview.com. We'll take all comments and answer as many questions as we can. And thank you all for listening. And thank you, Enid. It is always a great joy to spend some time with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.